Now first of all it is sufficiently established that, Troy having been taken, the utmost severity was shown to all the other Trojans, but that towards Aeneas and Antenor, the Greeks forbore all the rights of war, both in accordance with an ancient tie of hospitality, and because they had ever been the advisers of peace, and of the restoration of Helen. Then that Antenor after various vicissitudes came into the innermost bay of the Adriatic Sea, with a body of the Henoeti, who having been driven from Paphlagonia in consequence of a civil commotion, were in quest both of a settlement and a leader, their king Pylaemenes having been lost at Troy, and that the Henoeti and Trojans, having expelled the Euganei, who dwelt between the sea and the Alps, took possession of the country, and the place where they first landed is called Troy, from whence also the name of Trojan is given to the canton. But the nation in general is called Veneti, that Aeneas was driven from home by a similar calamity, but the fates leading him to the founding of a greater empire, he came first to Macedonia, that he sailed from thence to Sicily in quest of a settlement, that from Sicily he made for the Laurentine territory. This place also has the name of Troy. When the Trojans, having disembarked there, were driving plunder from the lands, as being persons to whom, after their almost immeasurable wandering, nothing was left but their arms and ships, Latinus the king, and the aborigines, who then occupied those places, assembled in arms from the city and country to repel the violence of the newcomers. On this point the tradition is twofold. Some say that Latinus, after being overcome in battle, made first a peace, and then an alliance with Aeneas. Others, that when the armies were drawn out in battle array, before the signals were sounded, Latinus advanced to the front of the troops and invited the leader of the adventurers to a conference. That he then inquired who they were, whence they had come, or by what casualty they had left their home, and in quest of what they had landed on the Laurentine territory. After he heard that the host were Trojans, their chief Aeneas, the son of Anchises and Venus, and that, driven from their own country and their homes, which had been destroyed by fire, they were seeking a settlement and a place for building a town. Struck with admiration of the noble origin of the nation and of the hero, and their spirit, alike prepared for peace or war, he confirmed the assurance of future friendship by giving his right hand, that upon this a compact was struck between the chiefs, and mutual greetings passed between the armies, that Aeneas was hospitably entertained by Latinus, that Latinus, in the presence of his household gods, added a family league to the public one, by giving Aeneas his daughter in marriage. This event confirms the Trojans in the hope of at length terminating their wanderings by a fixed and permanent settlement. They build a town. Aeneas calls it Lavinium, after the name of his wife. In a short time, too, a son was the issue of the new marriage, to whom his parents gave the name of Ascanius. The aborigines and Trojans were soon after attacked together in war. Turnus, king of the Rutulians, to whom Lavinia had been affianced before the coming of Aeneas, enraged that a stranger had been preferred to himself, made war on Aeneas and Latinus together. Neither side came off from that contest with cause for rejoicing. The Rutulians were vanquished. The victorious aborigines and Trojans lost their leader Latinus. Upon this Turnus and the Rutulians, diffident of their strength, have recourse to the flourishing state of the Etruscans and their king Mezentius, who holding his court at Coere, at that time an opulent town, being by no means pleased, even from the commencement, at the founding of the new city, and then considering that the Trojan power was increasing much more than was altogether consistent with the safety of the neighboring states, without reluctance joined his forces in alliance with the Rutulians. Aeneas, in order to conciliate the minds of the aborigines to meet the terror of so serious a war, called both nations Latins, so that they might all be not only under the same laws, but also the same name. Nor after that did the aborigines yield to the Trojans in zeal and fidelity towards their king Aeneas, relying therefore on this disposition of the two nations, who were now daily coalescing more and more, although Etruria was so powerful that it filled with the fame of its prowess not only the land, but the sea also, through the whole length of Italy, from the Alps to the Sicilian Strait, though he might have repelled the war by means of fortifications. Yet he led out his forces to the field. Upon this a battle ensued successful to the Latins, the last also of the mortal acts of Aeneas. He was buried, by whatever name human and divine laws require him to be called, on the banks of the river Numicius. They call him Jupiter Indiges. Ascanius, the son of Aeneas, was not yet old enough to take the government upon him. That government, however, remained secure for him till the age of maturity. In the interim, the Latin state and the kingdom of his grandfather and father were secured for the boy under the regency of his mother. Such capacity was there in Lavinia. I have some doubts, for who can state as certain a matter of such antiquity, whether this was the Ascanius, or one older than he, born of Creusa before the fall of Troy, and the companion of his father in his flight from thence, the same whom, being called Iulus, the Julian family call the author of their name. This Ascanius, wheresoever and of whatever mother born, it is at least certain that he was the son of Aeneas. Lavinium being overstocked with inhabitants, left that flourishing and, considering these times, wealthy city to his mother or stepmother, and built for himself a new one at the foot of Mount Alba, which, being extended on the ridge of a hill, was, from its situation, called Longa Alba. Between the founding of Lavinium and the transplanting this colony to Longa Alba, about 30 years intervened. Yet its power had increased to such a degree, especially after the defeat of the Etrurians, that not even upon the death of Aeneas, nor after that, during the regency of Lavinia, and the first essays of the young prince's reign, did Mezentius, the Etrurians, or any other of its neighbours dare to take up arms against it. A peace had been concluded between the two nations on these terms, that the river Albula, now called Tiber, should be the common boundary between the Etrurians and Latins. After him Silvius, the son of Ascanius, born by some accident in a wood, ascends the throne. He was the father of Aeneas Silvius, who afterwards begot Latinus Silvius. By him several colonies, called the ancient Latins, were transplanted. From this time all the princes, who reigned at Alba, had the surname of Silvius. From Latinus sprung Alba, from Alba Aetis, from Aetis Capis, from Capis Capitus, from Capitus Tiberinus, who, being drowned in crossing the river Albula, gave it a name famous with posterity. Then Agrippa, the son of Tiberinus. After Agrippa, Romulus Silvius ascends the throne, in succession to his father. The latter, having been killed by a thunderbolt, left the kingdom to Aventinus, who being buried on that hill, which is now part of the city of Rome, gave his name to it. After him reigns Procer. He begets Numitor and Amulius. To Numitor, his eldest son, he bequeaths the ancient kingdom of the Silvian family. But force prevailed more than the father's will or the respect due to seniority. For Amulius, having expelled his brother, seizes the kingdom. He adds crime to crime, murders his brother's male issue, and under pretence of doing his brother's daughter, Rhea Silvia, honour, having made her a Vestal virgin, by obliging her to perpetual virginity he deprives her of all hopes of issue. But, in my opinion, the origin of so great a city, and the establishment of an empire next in power to that of the gods, was due to the fates. The Vestal Rhea, being deflowered by force, when she had brought forth twins, declares Mars to be the father of her illegitimate offspring, either because she believed it to be so, or because a god was a more creditable author of her offence. But neither gods nor men protect her or her children from the king's cruelty. The priestess is bound and thrown into prison. The children he commands to be thrown into the current of the river. By some interposition of Providence, the Tiber, having overflowed its banks in stagnant pools, did not admit of any access to the regular bed of the river, and the bearers supposed that the infants could be drowned in water however still. Thus, as if they had effectually executed the king's orders, they exposed the boys in the nearest land flood, where now stands the Ficus Ruminalis. They say that it was called Romularis. The country thereabout was then a vast wilderness. The tradition is that when the water, subsiding, had left the floating trough, in which the children had been exposed, on dry ground, a thirsty she-wolf, coming from the neighbouring mountains, directed her course to the cries of the infants, and that she held down her dugs to them with so much gentleness that the keeper of the king's flock found her licking the boys with her tongue. It is said his name was Faustulus, and that they were carried by him to his homestead to be nursed by his wife Laurentia. Some are of opinion that she was called Lupa among the shepherds, from her being a common prostitute, and that this gave rise to the surprising story. The children thus born and thus brought up, when arrived at the years of manhood, did not loiter away their time in tending the folds or following the flocks, but roamed and hunted in the forests. Having by this exercise improved their strength and courage, they not only encountered wild beasts, but even attacked robbers laden with plunder, and afterwards divided the spoil among the shepherds. And in company with these, the number of their young associates daily increasing, they carried on their business and their sports. They say that the festival of the Lupercal, as now celebrated, was even at that time solemnized on the Palatine Hill, which, from Pallanteum, a city of Arcadia, was first called Palatium, and afterwards Mount Palatine. There they say that Evander, who belonged to the tribe of Arcadians, that for many years before had possessed that country, appointed the observance of a feast, introduced from Arcadia, in such manner, that young men ran about naked in sport and wantonness, doing honour to Pan Lycaeus, whom the Romans afterwards called Inuus. That the robbers, through rage at the loss of their booty, having lain in wait for them whilst intent on this sport, as the festival was now well known, whilst Romulus vigorously defended himself, took Remus prisoner, that they delivered him up, when taken, to King Amulius, accusing him with the utmost effrontery. They principally alleged it as a charge against them, that they had made incursions upon Numitor's lands, and plundered them in a hostile manner, having assembled a band of young men for the purpose. Upon this Remus was delivered to Numitor to be punished. Now, from the very first, Faustulus had entertained hopes that the boys whom he was bringing up were of the blood royal, for he both knew that the children had been exposed by the king's orders, and that the time at which he had taken them up agreed exactly with that period. But he had been unwilling that the matter, as not being yet ripe for discovery, should be disclosed, till either a fit opportunity or necessity should arise. Necessity came first. Accordingly, compelled by fear, he discovers the whole affair to Romulus. By accident also, whilst he had Remus in custody, and had heard that the brothers were twins, on comparing their age, and observing their turn of mind entirely free from servility, the recollection of his grandchildren struck Numitor, and on making inquiries he arrived at the same conclusion, so that he was well nigh recognizing Remus. Thus a plot is concerted for the king on all sides. Romulus, not accompanied by a body of young men, for he was unequal to open force, but having commanded the shepherds to come to the palace by different roads at a fixed time, forces his way to the king, and Remus, with another party from Numitor's house, assists his brother, and so they kill the king. Numitor, at the beginning of the fray, having given out that enemies had invaded the city, and assaulted the palace, after he had drawn off the Alban youth to secure the citadel with a garrison and arms, when he saw the young men, after they had killed the king, advancing to congratulate him, immediately called an assembly of the people, and represented to them the unnatural behaviour of his brother towards him, the extraction of his grandchildren, the manner of their birth and education, and how they came to be discovered. Then he informed them of the king's death, and that he was killed by his orders. When the young princes, coming up with their band through the middle of the assembly, saluted their grandfather king, an approving shout, following from all the people present, ratified to him both that title and the sovereignty. Thus the government of Alba being committed to Numitor, a desire seized Romulus and Remus to build a city on the spot where they had been exposed and brought up. And there was an overflowing population of Albans and of Latins. The shepherds too had come into that design, and all these readily inspired hopes, that Alba and Lavinium would be but petty places in comparison with the city which they intended to build. But ambition of the sovereignty, the bane of their grandfather, interrupted these designs, and thence arose a shameful quarrel from a beginning sufficiently amicable. For as they were twins, and the respect due to seniority could not determine the point, they agreed to leave to the tutelary gods of the place to choose, by augury, which should give a name to the new city, which govern it when built. Romulus chose the Palatine and Remus the Aventine Hill as their stands to make their observations. It is said that to Remus an omen came first, 6 vultures, and now, the omen having been declared, when double the number presented itself to Romulus, his own party saluted each king. The former claimed the kingdom on the ground of priority of time, the latter on account of the number of birds. Upon this, having met in an altercation, from the contest of angry feelings they turned to bloodshed. Their Remus fell from a blow received in the crowd. A more common account is, that Remus, in derision of his brother, leaped over his new-built wall, and was, for that reason, slain by Romulus in a passion, who, after sharply chiding him, added words to this effect, "So shall every one fare, who shall dare to leap over my fortifications." Thus Romulus got the sovereignty to himself. The city, when built, was called after the name of its founder. His first work was to fortify the Palatine hill where he had been educated. To the other gods he offers sacrifices according to the Alban rite, to Hercules according to the Grecian rite, as they had been instituted by Evander. There is a tradition that Hercules, having killed Geryon, drove his oxen, which were extremely beautiful, into those places, and that, after swimming over the Tiber and driving the cattle before him, being fatigued with travelling, he laid himself down on the banks of the river in a grassy place to refresh them with rest and rich pasture. When sleep had overpowered him, satiated with food and wine, a shepherd of the place, named Cacus, presuming on his strength and charmed with the beauty of the oxen, wished to purloin that booty, but because, if he had driven them forward into the cave, their footsteps would have guided the search of their owner thither, he therefore drew the most beautiful of them, one, by the tails, backwards into a cave. Hercules, awaking at daybreak, when he had surveyed his herd, and observed that some of them were missing, goes directly to the nearest cave, to see if by chance their footsteps would lead him thither. But when he observed that they were all turned from it, and directed him no other way, confounded, and not knowing what to do, he began to drive his cattle out of that unlucky place. Upon this, some of the cows, as they usually do, lowed on missing those that were left, and the lowings of those that were confined being returned from the cave, made Hercules turn that way. And when Cacus attempted to prevent him by force, as he was proceeding to the cave, being struck with a club, he was slain, vainly imploring the assistance of the shepherds. At that time Evander, who had fled from the Peloponnesus, ruled this country more by his credit and reputation than absolute sway. He was a person highly revered for his wondrous knowledge of letters, a discovery that was entirely new and surprising to men ignorant of every art, but more highly respected on account of the supposed divinity of his mother Carmenta, whom these nations had admired as a prophetess before the coming of the Sibyl into Italy. This prince, alarmed by the concourse of the shepherds hastily crowding round the stranger, whom they charged with open murder, after he heard the act and the cause of the act, observing the person and mien of the hero to be larger, and his gait more majestic than human, asked who he was. As soon as he was informed of his name, his father, and his native country, he said, "Hail, Hercules! Son of Jupiter, my mother, a truth-telling interpreter of the gods, has revealed to me that thou shalt increase the number of the celestials, and that to thee an altar shall be dedicated here, which some ages hence the most powerful people on earth shall call Ara Maxima, and honor according to thy own institution." Hercules, having given him his right hand, said that he accepted the omen, and would fulfill the predictions of the fates by building and consecrating an altar. There for the first time a sacrifice was offered to Hercules of a chosen heifer, taken from the herd, the Patitii and Pinarii, who were then the most distinguished families that inhabited these parts, having been invited to the service and the entertainment. It so happened that the Patitii were present in due time, and the entrails were set before them. When they were eaten up, the Pinarii came to the remainder of the feast. From this time it was ordained that while the Pinarian family subsisted, none of them should eat of the entrails of the solemn sacrifices. The Patitii, being instructed by Evander, discharged this sacred function as priests for many ages, until the office, solemnly appropriated to their family, being delegated to public slaves, their whole race became extinct. This was the only foreign religious institution which Romulus adopted, being even then an abettor of immortality attained by merit, to which his own destinies were conducting him.